Catholic History Trek, a podcast exploring the Catholic past.
In the last episode I recorded with Kevin, the episode on the history of the Divine Office, or Liturgy of the Hours, I mentioned Pope Gregory IX. His name came up due to a breviary he approved, which was used and popularized by the Order of Friars Minor, Franciscans. In that previous episode, I indicated that this pontiff would be coming up in a future episode involving a very interesting or odd topic. This episode of Catholic History Trek is the one I was speaking of. We'll trek through a mix of everything: the Crusades, unusual papal elections, an emperor and a pope going at each other, rampant heresy, and bizarre satanic rituals, all of which culminates in a papal bull which allegedly condemned cats. Cats? When I think of cats, I instantly think of Chessie the cat, which was an image of a kitten tucked into bed sleeping on a soft pillow. It was used as the logo of the Chessie System Holding Company, which operated the B&O, the C&O, and the Western Maryland Railroads during the 1970s and 1980s, and appeared on the sides of their black and yellow locomotive engines. During his papacy, Pope Gregory IX condemned heresies and an obstinate emperor, but did he really condemn cats? Did he have something against the ancestors of Chessie the cat? We shall see. Ugolino de Segni was born about the year 1145, in the central part of what is now Italy. He was educated at the universities of Paris and Bologna, and was appointed by his uncle, Pope Innocent III, as papal chaplain, archpriest of St. Peter's, and then as a cardinal deacon. By the year 1206, he was promoted to the position of a cardinal bishop, and in the following year, he and Cardinal Brancaleone were set as papal legates to Germany to mediate a dispute between Philip of Swabia and Otto of Brunswick, both of whom laid claim to the German throne following the death of Henry VI. While they were unable to resolve the dispute, they did succeed in effecting a truce between the two claimants. In 1216, after the death of his uncle Pope Innocent III, Ugolino was part of a papal election in which only 2 cardinals voted. The College of Cardinals entrusted the selection of the Pope to 2 of their members, Guido of Praeneste and Ugolino. Between the 2 of them, they selected the man who became Pope Honorius III. The streamlined process saw Honorius elected only 2 days after the death of Pope Innocent III. In 1217, Pope Honorius entrusted Ugolino with preaching the crusade in Lombardy and Tuscia. This crusade, which would be the 5th crusade, had originally been called for by the deceased Pope Innocent III, and Pope Honorius III intended to see it through. While in this capacity of preaching in Italy, Ugolino was also able to mediate peace between various Italian cities, such as Pisa and Genoa, Milan and Cremona, and Bologna and Pistoia. In 1220, he crowned Frederick II as the Holy Roman Emperor, and this emperor vowed to embark on this 5th crusade and sail for the Holy Land by August of 1221. A year later, Ugolino was again commissioned to preach the crusade, this time in central and northern Italy, as well as the southern portions. In 1227, when Pope Honorius III died, the cardinals again agreed on an election by compromise and chose a group of 3 cardinals to select the next pope. Again, Ugolino was among the electors. At first, the 3 cardinals selected Conrad of Urach, who was one of the 3 electors, but hoping to avoid the appearance of electing himself, Conrad refused. The 3 cardinals next selected another from their group, Ugolino, who was over 80 years old at the time of this election. Ugolino accepted the papacy and took the name Pope Gregory IX. The year was 1227, and Emperor Frederick II still had yet to embark on the crusade he promised half a dozen years earlier. In fact, he had postponed his vow of crusade at least 8 or 9 times since becoming emperor. So, just 3 days after being installed pope, Gregory IX essentially ordered the man he had crowned emperor to set off for the Holy Land. The emperor was supposed to take part in the 5th crusade, but by this point, that crusade had ceased years earlier. So, while the crusade of Frederick II is referred to as the 6th crusade, it could also be seen as a very delayed part of the 5th crusade, perhaps Crusade 5.1, or something like that. Regardless, it seemed as if Frederick was finally going to make good on his word, as he soon set sail for the east. But only after 3 days at sea his fleet returned, with the emperor claiming that both he and one of his leaders had suddenly become ill. Apparently frustrated with the emperor's continued excuses and failure to act, Pope Gregory IX placed the emperor under the ban of the church, excommunication. The emperor was upset with the threat of excommunication and sent letters to the Christian princes within the empire to justify why he was in the right. Meanwhile, the pope also sent letters to the Christian princes explaining why he was in the right. Ultimately, most of the princes within the Holy Roman Empire sided with the emperor in the matter. And when the pope published the excommunication, a group in Rome loyal to the emperor openly insulted and threatened the pope, forcing him to flee to Viterbo and then to Perugia. Finally, in 1228, Frederick set out for the Holy Land and asked for the customary papal blessing upon his venture. But the pope, instead of offering the blessing, refused it and put him under a second ban, claiming that as an excommunicated emperor, he had no right to commence a holy war. In multiplication, 2 negatives makes a positive, but in canon law, I'm pretty sure 2 excommunications didn't make the emperor unexcommunicated. Regardless, even with a majority of the princes siding with the emperor, this second ban initiated a reconcilement between the emperor and the pope. This is because the ban released the crusaders from any oath of loyalty to the emperor, who is now actually making good on his vow and was finally in the Holy Land. The reconcilement was in part because Frederick knew it would be difficult to lead an army who were not bound to follow him. Frederick II returned from the Holy Land in the year 1229, and a year later, the Pope was finally able to return from exile and back to Rome. The two sides agreed to a treaty which lifted the excommunications and returned territory within the Papal States back to the pontiff, territory which had been seized by imperial forces while Frederick was away on his brief crusade. Unfortunately, a decade later, Pope Gregory IX again excommunicated Emperor Frederick II. I think this would be the emperor's third excommunication. I'm not sure what the record is, but 3 formal excommunications does seem like a lot. This time, the dispute was over the secular rule of the Italian peninsula. The Pope saw himself as the supreme ruler of that region, based on his spiritual authority over the Christian world, while the emperor saw himself as the supreme rule over the territories and enforced his vision with a heavy-handed approach. When the emperor declared his intention to conquer the Papal States, the excommunication was announced. The ban against Frederick had spiritual weight, but had little success in the secular world. Many German bishops and princes sided with the emperor, who had even gone so far as to block and arrest any bishops who attempted to attend a general council called by Pope Gregory IX at Rome in the year 1241. Frederick II marched with his army towards Rome intent to conquer, but the dispute between the two of them was suddenly resolved when the nearly 100-year-old pope suddenly died. If you've listened to any of our podcast episodes, you're probably familiar by now that there was often strife between the Holy Roman Emperor or secular rulers and the papacy and the church. This was not anything new with Pope Gregory IX, and as the emperors were very strong in trying to impose their will, the popes had to be equally strong or be run over. And while the 13-and-a-half-year papacy of Pope Gregory IX was tainted by the long-standing strife between the pontiff and the Holy Roman Emperor, there were many positives which came from this papacy. As a man of learning, the pope encouraged and promoted the universities, and bestowed many privileges on his alma mater, the University of Paris. But he also kept a careful watch over its professors, repeatedly warning them against subjecting theology to philosophy or leaning towards any of the various heresies spreading throughout Europe. He created about 14 cardinals during his papacy, with many of them coming from the religious orders. Of these cardinals, one became the future Pope Innocent IV, and another succeeded Innocent IV as Pope Alexander IV. Pope Gregory IX had a deep love for the mendicant orders which were springing up during this era. He especially admired their voluntary poverty, which ran contrary to the abuse of opulent living which too many clergymen favored in this time. Their interest in poverty and holiness made them great missionaries to combat the many heresies which were also springing up, in part as a reaction to the poor example of the priests and bishop of their day. Also, the Pope admired their desire to preach the gospel, even in lands where proclaiming the truth of Jesus was often met with martyrdom. While still a cardinal bishop in Ostia before he became pope, he would often don a Franciscan habit and walk about barefoot with St. Francis and his disciples. St. Francis prophetically referred to Ugolino as the bishop of the whole world and the father of nations. When Ugolino later became Pope Gregory IX, he canonized the Franciscans Francis of Assisi and Anthony of Padua. He even commanded the Franciscan Thomas of Solano to write the biography of Francis. He not only esteemed the Franciscans, but he was also a devoted friend of St. Dominic and canonized him upon his death. Pope Gregory IX also promoted and supported other orders like the Poor Clares, the Norbertines, the Carmelites, and approved the new order of Our Lady of Mercy for the redemption of captives. As kind and generous as Pope Gregory IX was towards the mendicant orders, he was quite the opposite towards heretics. He approved the Northern Crusades to convert the pagans of the Baltic lands, and upon the request of King Louis IX of France, he assisted the king in his crusade against the Albigensian heresy plaguing France. But not only were heretics in places like France and Finland, but they were even in the Pope's backyard in the eternal city of Rome. During his exile from Rome, which lasted from 1228 to 1231, heretics had the run of the city and grew numerous. Therefore, in 1231, the Pope enacted a law in the city which called for the heretics condemned by an ecclesiastical court to be delivered to the secular authorities to receive their due punishment, which was often death by fire for the obstinate or life imprisonment for the penitent. By today's standards, a death sentence for embracing and promoting heresy seems a bit harsh. But to place these laws into context, we need to remember the death penalty was a common form of punishment in that era, and these sentences were not going above and beyond, but simply followed the norms of the day. Also, these heretics, by leading men away from truth and salvation, were condemning men to an eternal death with their teachings. Killing a man's body would have been seen as a just exchange if it meant to save other men's souls. And the problem of heresy was trending in the wrong direction, which became evident years later, culminating in the Protestant movement. And I'm not making a commentary on that or justifying the death penalty for heresy, or trying to pit Pope Gregory IX against Pope Francis, who came out strongly against the death penalty in 2018, but just trying to put Gregory's position into context. In Pope Gregory's war on heresy, the learned priest Conrad of Marburg was one of the men appointed to an active role in combating the heretical Albigensians, Waldensians, and Cathars. In Conrad's work to root out heresy, he apparently discovered a Luciferian cult in northern Germany. This finding gave rise to Pope Gregory's first papal bull, Vox in Rama, issued in 1233. The title comes from the first words of Rachel's lament found in Matthew 2:18. Per the Latin Vulgate, the verse is, Vox in Rama audita et ploratus, et ululatus multus. Rachel plorans filios suos, et noluit consolari, quia non sunt. In English, the verse is, A voice in Rama was heard, lamentation and great mourning, Rachel bewailing her children, and would not be comforted, because they were not. This Vox in Rama should not be confused with the chant for the Feast of the Holy Innocents on December 28th, which is also titled Vox in Rama. The text of this chant for this double a second-class feast is entirely different than the text of this papal bull. Vox in Rama, the papal bull, is one of the more interesting aspects of Gregory IX's pontificate, due to its popular association with black cats, and supposedly being the origin of the black cat's infamy of being associated with witchcraft. In the papal bull, Vox in Rama, a detailed and disturbing description of the rituals performed by these Satanists discovered by Conrad of Marburg are given. They kiss a frog, some on the frog's mouth, other on the frog's butt, after which a pale-faced man with skin stretched over his bones kisses the memory of the Catholic faith from the novices. Next, they sit down for a banquet, and afterwards a black cat descends backwards down a certain statue with its tail erect, and in turn those gathered kiss the cat on its butt, after which they bow to the cat and recite certain responses, and when they are done with the black cat, they extinguish the candles and engage in, well, I'll just say immoral acts in the darkness. Then the candles are relit, and Lucifer briefly emerges. commending them for their service. When he appears, the upper half of his body is in the form of a man, shining as brightly as the sun, while his lower half is deformed from his fall from grace, with coarse skin covered with fur like that of a black cat. Besides detailing the sordid affair, Pope Gregory IX goes on to describe how these heretics receive and desecrate the Eucharist at Passover, and the Pope calls upon the zeal of Moses, Elijah, Mattathias, Phineas, and others who put to death those who acted so abhorrently towards the Lord. Some historians treat this papal bull as inaugurating Europe's taboo treatment of black cats, and as evidence point to a pair of well-known anti-cat festivals which took place near northern Germany, where Conrad of Marburg had identified the satanic cult. During Denmark's Fastelavn, meaning the evening before the fast, which took place the night before Lent began, one activity was knocking the cat out of the barrel. Basically, a cat was placed in a barrel, and you had to knock it out of there, symbolic of beating out the evil in preparation for Lent and then Easter. Another festival, the Castigater, literally the Festival of the Cats, took place in Ypres, Belgium. During this festival, it was the custom to hurl cats from a church bell tower. The last cat tossing was recorded in the year 1817. And nowadays, the festival is more of a celebration of cats than a condemnation, with people donning cat costumes and holding a parade with cat-themed floats. People still toss cats from a bell tower, but they're stuffed toy cats. Europe's general distrust of cats was not limited to these two festivals, but it's even said that cats were buried alive as part of the coronation celebration for Queen Elizabeth I of England. And the English Parliament's Witchcraft Act of 1563, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth, led to the execution of many supposed Scottish witches and their cats. And in the late 1730s in France, there was what's called the Great Cat Massacre, when a pair of printing apprentices rounded up all the cats they could find in the city, put them on trial, and then proceeded to torture and kill them. Some have even gone so far to blame Pope Gregory IX for the spread of the bubonic plague, or Black Death, which ravaged Europe, eliminating 1/3 of her population. They claim that his papal bull, written over a century earlier, spurred an extensive elimination of cats throughout the continent, allowing rats to freely spread the plague. So, should Pope Gregory IX be remembered as the bane of cat lovers and crazy cat ladies? Did Vox and Rama condemn Europe's cat population? My personal opinion is that while there was a general distrust or dislike of cats throughout Europe, blaming Pope Gregory IX for a reduced number of European cats, or the Black Death, does not seem to hold up to scrutiny. First, it wasn't uncommon to skin cats for their fur. The harvesting of cat furs would have done more to reduce Europe's cat population than a few various anti-cat festivals in the northern part of the Holy Roman Empire. Second, there's little evidence of coordinated anti-cat measures taken across Europe initiated by this papal bull. These two local festivals would have done little to the continent-wide cat population, assuming they even came about because of the papal bull. The coronation of the anti-Catholic Queen Elizabeth I and the Great Cat Massacre in France were wholly unconnected to Vox and Rama. Third, cats aren't even that great at rat control. While some cats do hunt rats, they mostly hunt smaller game like mice. Rat control is more effective with dogs, especially terriers, who were known as ratters for their penchant at killing rodents. Fourth, the plague originated in Asia, and it spread throughout all of Asia, and then into North Africa, and into southern Europe, all before coming in contact with the areas that would have been noticeably affected by a papal inspiration to wipe out cats. Fifth, by the time of the bull Vox and Rama was promulgated, the Pope had been at odds with Emperor Frederick II for over a decade, and the princes and bishops of Germany had repeatedly shown that they sided with the emperor over the Pope. So, there just wouldn't be much acceptance of this, or any papal bull, from Gregory IX in the Holy Roman Empire. And finally, Vox and Rama makes zero mention of doing anything to cats. Nowhere in the document is there a call to round them up or kill them. Similarly, there's no mention of eliminating frogs, who are also used in the evil rituals of these heretics. When I found the Latin text of the bull and was able to type it all out and convert it into English, I expected to find some mention of cats being evil, or being condemned or something like that. Instead, they are only mentioned in passing. Pope Gregory IX's focus was on the evil of these heretics, not on killing cats. So, while it may be attention-grabbing for secular historians to denounce the Pope for spurring an anti-cat killing frenzy throughout Europe, and thus causing the spread of the Black Death, the data just doesn't seem to support this. Ultimately, it seems as nonsensical as claiming the Church chained Bibles because they did not want people to read them. Pope Gregory IX should be remembered for his support of the Mendicant Orders and his battles against heresy and Frederick II, but for many, he's remembered for an invented condemnation against cats, stemming from his papal bull denouncing a cat butt-licking heresy. And speaking of his papal bull, it was written in the Church's language of Latin. I wanted to find a good, short prayer, which could be invoked against heresy or evil rituals as highlighted in this episode. And while there are many good options, I decided on the one called O Bone Jesu. O Bone Jesu, miserere nobis, quia tu creaste nos, tu redemisti nos, sanguine tuo pretiosissimo. Amen.
Thank you for listening to Catholic History Trek. You can reach us at catholichistorytrek@gmail.com.